Really loud on my end. All right, welcome to week 19, day one. We're now in the second week of React. There's only one more to go after this, so the end is in sight. But then again, not a lot of time for all these concepts we're throwing at you. Today, we are taking just a slight shift. You've learned about state in well, first we started with components, and then we added in state to help manage our variables and everything we want to work with in our code. And then we added on props as well, being able to pass that to other components. If you have a state in a parent component, you can pass it in as a prop to a child, all the like. But we are looking at making a full stack app, and up to this point, everything we've kind of messed with doesn't really give you room to do API calls for data from, other sources. Right now, most of this stuff is just purely within our React app, and it reacts and updates based on either user interaction with the app or just some code you write within the app itself. Um, but we haven't really touched on how to get that outside data that you will be building with your backend using Django, the Django REST framework, and serving up those URL endpoints for your API. And today we're going to learn about useEffect in React, which is what React uses to. Okay, so let me pull up the documentation first. In your README, it'll bring you to the documentation, but this literally says right off the bat, some components need to synchronize with external systems. So you might want a non-React component based on a React state, or you want to set up a server connections, blah, blah, blah. So these effects let you run some code after rendering the rest of your app so that you can synchronize that within your app. So think about your API calls. You want that to run, but you want it to run kind of outside anything happening with React. You want it to go fetch that data and bring it back. And then once you do, then you can throw it into your React system, or React app, which has already rendered. Um, this page, this documentation gives you a very good description of what effects are for React. So if you're curious on like the theory, the why, the how, well, we'll go over the how, but the theory, the why, go ahead and read this page that's linked in the README. It's actually pretty cool because it gives you might not need an effect. Here's how you write it. But let's say we want to do this and it shows you that doesn't work in React. And that's because we have to use an effect here. We can't just, what is this even trying to do? Like a play or pause, I guess. If it's like a music player, you want to play or pause it. You can't do it, I guess, just programmatically. And that's because to do something with the DOM node during rendering, we need, let's see, should not contain side effects like modifying the DOM. Okay. So we want our JavaScript to run, and it shouldn't have any side effects out of it that modify the DOM. It just kind of makes the DOM, but doesn't modify it. Anyways, lots of good information in here to read. Most of the time, you're going to use effects to fetch your API data and save it to a state. That's probably what you're going to do 99.9% of the time. So we're going to kind of look at how to set up useEffect in a React app. So I went ahead and got my basic React app up. It's not running yet. I just did the npm install. So let's go ahead and take out this. We can see up here we import useState, but we also need to import our useEffect from React. So these two will probably appear on most all of your page. Well, this one won't appear on most all. Only the ones you'd make like API calls or something that you expect to happen in your React app without a trigger per se. Well, okay, these have triggers and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like I'm talking about like if the user clicks a button that's an event, right? And we do event handlers. We can set up these effects to happen in React without anything really coming in from the user. So no button pushes, nothing like that. So that's what we're kind of looking at here. So to format a useEffect function, there are 3 different ways we can do it. Let me put in, so the general setup, and this is going to look kind of weird. Oh, it can't be used down there. Sorry. We don't do anything like that down there. That's just our HTML. It's going to go up here. So we call the useEffect function, and then we have a parameter here, which we typically don't do anything. You don't pass in anything to this because you're usually just using this to trigger some action happening. So then we have a function. We'll write in here, this is the what is going to happen when this effect triggers. And then this last part here is what is the trigger for this effect, a dependency. What is it dependent on? So we can set up the dependent portion in 3 different ways. And this is explained in the README too, so if you need to lay eyes on description versus just having it explained and shown, it's in there as well. But you can, for this dependency, you can leave it blank. So then when you leave it blank, this effect will run every time React renders. So think about when we were adding that like input field, when I was doing that color boxes example, every time I typed a letter, it was updating that state, and we could see it in our console log, how it added, another letter every time we typed something in. That state updated every time, and React rendered every time. So if you make a use effect that doesn't have a dependency and just fires every time React renders, it's going to fire like hundreds of times in a few seconds. So this is a very dangerous one to use because it will just all of a sudden start flying off the handle, and you're like, whoa, 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 because React, that's what it does, is it, automatically renders based on state and the like. So this can be useful, but chances are you probably won't run this to go every single time React renders. One of the more popular things here, which is what you will likely lean towards with your API calls, is another thing we can do is just have an empty array here. When we have an empty array, this makes this effect, this function that we'll write in there, fire or run only the first time this React app renders or this component renders. So this would be like if you're visiting this page for the first time, it's going to render. This function will go at that first instance, but then never again. So it won't fire continuously every time somebody's inputting something. So a good example for this is if you want to grab data from an API to display on the page, doesn't need any interaction with it per se, you can just do a fetch call in here. That our JavaScript, if we remember back to when we were working in our front end with our HTML, CSS, JavaScript, we did our fetches, and then we did a JSON loads and all that stuff. So we can write that within this function, and we would do our API call the first time the page loads and save it into like a state. So then from then on, anything you do to display down here on the page, you could just use the state for. It would be loaded with all your API data that you pulled from the first time the page loaded. So that's what the empty array does. It will run this effect the first time, or only during the first render. The other way you can tell this to work or fire off the effect is by identifying either a prop or a state to be dependent on. So what this means then is it will be watching, like maybe we have count. If we put count in here, then anytime this state is updated, this effect will change or run. So I will show an example of good uses for this, but sometimes you don't need, you want something to run, but if you're making an API call with like a selection that they've chosen, like if you're doing like a food recipe search and they pick from a drop down chicken, most APIs you'd have to do like a fetch or a get to like an endpoint with slash an ingredient, which would be chicken. So you could save whatever they selected in a state, and then once that state updates, you can run an API call within this function here to grab like what that chicken recipe would be. And chances are you'd save that in another state as well. So these are the three different ways. Oh, and so you can have it just on one, or you can have it on like two states or props. So this would be if this one or this one updated, then run this, what's in this function here. Any questions so far on how useEffect is structured and how it is triggered? Okay, somebody then, since there's no questions, somebody want to give me a recap in their words of the three different triggers for the useEffect? Don't everybody jump at once. I'm going to call on somebody if I don't get a volunteer in the next. And there's no wrong answers, we're just learning. But give me in your words what you remember from what the three triggers are.
Would count be one of the triggers that you're talking about?
Yep, count. So, yep, we said that we can have a state be a trigger by putting it in these square brackets and identifying the state. So this is, yep, this is one of the ways this effect can be triggered. What was another way it could be triggered? Anybody else? Adam, oh, you're shaking your head no. Adam, you can't remember the other two? What does this trigger mean? Just empty brackets.
An array or list.
So that is what it is. But it's not, in this instance, it's not actually an array. It's a type, like when does this trigger? So the last one triggered every time count or that state was updated. When does this one trigger?
Does it default to like on load or something?
More or less. Yep, exactly. So this is triggered the first render of the React page or component or whatever. So typically it would look like an onload for a page because that will be the first time your React app renders. Then this is what this effect will trigger off of that. So empty array or list in Python is the kickoff at first render and then never again. Okay, and now last one I'll help you with, it's blank. What is a blank? If I don't have anything identified as a dependency or a trigger for this effect, when is this going to run then?
An error.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't catch it.
It's going to error out.
Well, it won't error out. It will run, it could error out though, because it's going to run every time this page or this, every time there's a render in React. Okay, so every time there's a render, and we know React renders every time a state gets updated. Or yeah, pretty much most of the time whenever a state's updated. So there's a lot of things that will be happening to update states. It will throw quite a lot of, it will execute this function quite a lot of times, but who knows? You might want it to do that. So good job. More or less, those you guys got it. Those are the three ways. So either trigger this effect at every render, trigger it only the first time this app renders, or page component, whatever you want to say, or identify a state or prop for it to be dependent on and only run and execute when the state or prop is updated. All right, so here's an example. I'm going to just grab this from, we're going to overwrite. This is from the README. So in this, we're in our default function app. We don't need to import React. That's just a given. So we have here, what is this? Even gives you a hint. What is this again? What type of React feature is this?
The state.
Yep, this is our state. So we have count, and then what does the second part do? The set count. Adam,
Place the current state of the count.
you said this means the current state of the count?
I thought you meant the after the equal sign.
Oh, yes. So this is definitely what we initialize count as for sure. But I meant this one. What does set count do?
Doesn't that tell it what it wants to do?
Yep, more or less. It updates our count state to be whatever you put within this set count. So down here we see set count. We'll take what count is and then do it count plus 1. So it takes this whole value, which is just going to be count plus 1, and sets count to be the new state. So anything with inside set count is going to be the new value of the state. Okay, good. So this is using a useEffect. We can see we got our function here, our parentheses, oops. We've got our parameters here that are passed in, which is never really nothing. Fat arrow function to our function that we call. And then this is the dependency down here, right? So what is this useEffect? When is this going to trigger? If this is the dependency, when is my useEffect going to trigger?
Whenever count is updated. Correct.
Whenever count is updated, then this useEffect will trigger. And it will always, I think they always run on the first render as well. Yes, exactly. Sorry, that was a very key thing to say too. So it will also render anything. When you leave it blank, it'll run every time it renders. When you do the empty array, it will render on the first time. And when you identify a specific state, it will render at the first time and every time count is updated. Okay, so this will run when React first renders. So immediately when I load this page, this is going to run. So what this does is it sets a timeout. And set timeout, you can see this function here takes in, it looks like a function to perform, and then comma, I'm assuming this is the time that it waits to perform it. So can somebody tell me what they think this effect, what is going to happen when I load this page and this effect runs? What is this doing?
It's incrementing count every 1,000 seconds, or was it milliseconds, I think? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to, let's see. I don't know what the time number is. Set it. I'm sure it's. I'd have to look it up. Yeah, but yes, absolutely. This is the delay that it's going to use because a timeout is kind of like a pause, and then once it reaches that, like, well, it'll run this function after that delay.
Every 1 second, yeah.
Okay, so it is milliseconds, huh?
Mhm.
All right, so when this page loads, this effect runs, and it runs in order. So it's going to set the timeout of 1 second. And then it's going to update the count. Now, when count updates, that's a trigger, right? When count updates, so it's going to update the count, and then all of a sudden, boop, we've triggered this again. It waits a second and then increments the count once. Oh, count got updated. We triggered this again. So it's going to go through. This is literally going to run every 1 second until we get out of this page because that's what this was programmed to do. So let's take a look at it and make sure it runs like we thought it would. Oh gosh, yep. See, it took off. It's going. So when I refresh the page, it starts. Oh, it skipped one. Interesting. Why did it skip one? I've rendered count times. So we start at 0 and we increment. It probably happened so fast it missed that one. That's funny. But we can see how this is running. This is running and updating this state on its own because we've basically made this closed loop where this effect is dependent on this state and this state is being updated in this effect. So it's kind of a circular function here. Any questions on use state? Or sorry, not use state, use effect. Okay, I'm going to kill this now. Now we're going to look at how you will likely use this. And I'm going to try to fly through this so we can get to a more pertinent example. For that, we're just going to copy and paste from the README and walk through this. And again, I could tell that there was some help making these because nobody imports React anymore. Only AI does. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So we have our app function. Down here is the return. So all we're going to see is today's joke. Looks like daily joke and the curly brackets. So this is the variable somewhere up here, a state. We'll figure that out in a bit. Oh, looks like it is right there. It's the state right here. And then we have a button that on click, we will set joke given to true. And it says, click me for a new joke. All right, so let's look at this. We've got jokes given. Has a new joke been given? That's what this is, set new joke or set joke given to true. And then we have a daily joke. Both these are states. Both of these are going to hold some values for us and that we can use throughout our React page here. Let's look at this use effect. First off, what is its trigger? When will this use effect run? Use effect syntax will always have the use effect fat arrow function, your function right here in brackets, and then comma, dependency, and parenthesis.
So that's going to run every time set joke given is I guess it's going to change to true, but it's every time joke given value changes, it's going to run.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. So, and don't forget, it will run initially on initial render as well, and every time this joke given is updated. Right. Because it's watching joke given. We can see it's set to false initially. So let's look at the use effect. Yes, Art, you have a question.
we said that it's gonna get updated every time joke given is initiated. Um,
Change.
changed. Now, is it getting initiated, changed based on line 27 when someone clicks on a button, they're like requesting a joke, and that's updating or that's changing line 19?
Yeah,
Am I
so
reading
we'll
that right?
Yep, we'll go ahead and walk through this use effect and then see also. So we know automatically the state will change when they click on this button, right? Because they've set joke given to true. It's initialized as false. But when we click this button, the state definitely changes. So when this button is clicked and the state changes, this use effect is going to fire off. Somebody give it a shot and tell me what this use effect is doing when the button's clicked and the state has changed to true.
So the use effect fetch data is it's doing a API fetch call to the HTTPS joke link, and then when it gets the data back, it's going to set the daily, well, so that should be set daily joke instead of set daily goal right there in line 14, right?
Good catch, yes.
Yeah.
Now we
So
can see it's being used.
yeah. So now so that's also it's going to set the daily joke or yeah, it's going to set the daily joke, and then it's going to run the fetch data function up there, and um then it'll set joke given back to false, which will basically zero it out or return it back to its original state. And then on click, with the on click, it's going to set the joke given to true and return that daily joke for today's joke up there underneath the H1 tag.
Very good. Yep. So you can just, you don't have to make it a constant. You can just do like a fetch data and write this all out individually, but this is wrapped in a function. This is the API call. And can anybody remember why we do an async function here? Anybody besides Cisco? If we had to guess, what does async mean or asynchronous? What does that mean? No guesses? Okay, so if I'm rendering this page, do I want every single line of this to run in order and not display anything until I like get everything situated where it's supposed to be? What if this API data takes a really long time to get? And if I'm not doing this, like, if I'm having to wait on other code or wait on this to complete before rendering other stuff or doing other thing in my app, it can slow down your web page and look like it's crashed or frozen or something. So async is what we do when we are looking to run this API call simultaneously with whatever processes are happening already in the code. So the code doesn't stop and hold up and wait for this to come back. Only the portions that are like relying on it, so this set daily joke, that is going to have to wait for this API data, right? But everything else, go ahead and do your thing, go ahead and throw up there, get the buttons going, everything like that, because this is going to run the first time we visit the page, because this renders on first time and every time that the state's updated. So if we go to this page and this API call is taking forever and the page is blank, people are gonna be like, what the heck's going on here? And click off it or click refresh and start the API call all over again. So That is why we run asynchronous fetches, so that this can run while other stuff is running and nothing's like waiting for this to completely finish before doing their thing. Okay, so save this page if you want a good setup on how to just use effect with an API call. And you can literally just change out, you know, the URL you're fetching from, any pertinent headers it might need. But then all the rest of it is kind of just like, you know, change the state it gets saved to. So if I said, like, we've talked about how this updates or this use effect runs every time that joke given state has changed. So what happens here? We're changing the state here, right? Is this going to update? Is this update to the state going to make this effect run again?
I would guess that it was, and I think that by changing it to false, it might like have the website think that that same person hasn't been there before, so they might get the same joke of the day because
Let's
it's just
take a
going back
look.
to false.
Yeah, let's take a look and see what's happening here. So we visited our page. So the first time that we visit this page, React has rendered, so it's going to kick off this use effect. So it's already done this fetch and set a daily joke. So it's got daily joke up here. So then we can see the value of daily joke. Let me find that page again now that I clicked off it. We can see the daily joke right here. Hate perforated lines, they're terrible. Okay, I like bad dad jokes, so this is great lecture. Anyways, so this has ran, and we have a joke here. So if we think that having this state change here will cause this to fire again, what I'm expecting then is if I click this button, so our state will change here. So I expect to see a joke, but then I also stage change here, so I'll expect to see a second joke pop up after it. So if what we think is going to happen, I should see 1, 2 jokes go through with the button click. And we do, because this one sucks. So this use effect does run every time this state changes, and it doesn't matter if it's inside the use effect function. The state changed, so it's ready for a new joke. So that was a good call, but don't do that. We don't want to do that. I'm going to show you a way to I guess work around something like this from happening, because this is, I mean, it looks messed up, right? So if you have some weird things going on with your app when you make it, just look back at your use effect and see what your dependency is that you're listening to and where that might be changing or updating and how it could be contributing to some weird issues. I actually had forgotten that was how that went. So I was kind of curious to see how that went. That's why I'm kind of surprised. All right, so any questions on that? Was the lecture essentially was just showing how to use a use effect with a dependency, and most of the time you're going to fetch API data with it. Okay. There's no questions. The rest of lecture we can see is just kind of reviewing all 3 of these things together. I think this was just meant as like you guys read it and review it. But I'm going to go into an extra example, which we can take a break for real quick first and then come back and do that. So I will stop recording now.